Well, kia ora everyone again. That's actually one of the best managed and behaved transition I've ever seen from standing around chatting and mingling to sitting. So thank you for that. Just goes to show the MND community is very disciplined. So, thank you. We can't put these events on without the support of some huge supporters really, and I want to introduce Tamati Coffee, the MP, Labour MP, who's been a major supporter of MND New Zealand and people with MND for a long time, and has an association, a lived experience with it, and it's Tamati's sponsorship for us to be here today, which we really appreciate. And Tamati's going to open with karakia for us.
Sure. Tuatahi he mihi tēnei kia koutou katoa, a koutou kua tai mai nei, ki te hāpai tēnei kaupapa. Ngā hau e whā, no ngā tai e whā, nei rā te mihi kia koutou katoa. First of all, can I thank you, Scott, for the introduction, and also thank the association as well for gathering everybody together in a room to talk about this really important kaupapa. Scott mentioned it before. I've got my own personal story when it comes to MND. My partner called me up one day and he was really concerned because his auntie was going through some health issues. She was unable to speak. Her speech had started slurring and they didn't know what the problem was. And so they took her again and again into the hospital. They spoke to specialists. Nobody could quite put their finger on what was wrong with Auntie Marie, I'll give her a name. And Auntie Marie went through a pretty traumatic 6 months of trying to diagnose what the problem was until she spoke with a specialist that said, "You've got motor neurone disease." And nobody in our family had ever had that. Nobody in his family had ever had that. And it was a real concern. And for that reason, we suddenly, as you do, you become experts. As much as the information that's out there, we started understanding as much as we could about what MND was, what was happening to Auntie Marie, how we could support her as she went on that journey. And she was an old battle axe, and she was a beautiful person as well. And it got to the point where she had to communicate on an iPad, and one of the things that made us realise that her mind was still sharp as a tack was that she would write really inappropriate things, swear words, swearing at people, places, all kinds of things, swearing at the disease itself, and that told me that actually we're still 100% up there, despite the fact that she was unable to verbalise it. And to that point as well, she was a smoker all of her life, and in her final days, we said we're not going to take away the little joy that she's got. So it was my job to stand in the archway and hold the cigarette up to her mouth as she would inhale and just get complete joy out of just being able to inhale a cigarette. And she passed away not long after that, and we remember her. And it was when I came back to meet up with the MND Society, and I said to them, I've got a pretty harrowing tale. It's a local story for me. It means a lot, and basically if you need anything, I'm here for you. And that started a bit of a 7 or 8 year relationship that I've had with MND, and I've found that in my time here in Parliament, the awareness has grown. And just this week, today actually, I was having conversations with fellow colleagues who have also been affected in one way, shape or form by MND. I want to acknowledge my colleague Rachel Boyack, who's the MP for Nelson, who talked about her cousin Holly, who is doing some work. Sorry? Molly, my apologies. Who's doing work in this space, but actually I look around the room and I think that if nothing else, if you come together today to try and push this scrum forward, to create awareness, to try and find solutions to those people who have yet to be diagnosed, then it will all happen with it. So thank you for allowing yourself to be here today. Thank you for wanting to find more solutions to the many questions that we've got when it comes to MND. And I look forward to hearing some of the recommendations that come out of this week today. I will give a karakia and I'll let you get on, and then I'll come back at the end to wrap things up. So, kia inoi tātou, let us go. Ai pā, whakatuwhera mai ki a mātoenga kua hao te tika o te pono o te maramatanga, ma mātou no koe whakamoimuti e whakakoria I tō ingoa tapu moake tonu atu. Āmene. Let's go.
Kia ora, thank you, Tamati, and delightful about there's 2 or 3 MPs in the room. Thank you for coming today. The life of an MP is a complex one, and so really appreciate the fact that you've come and spend some time with us today. We do appreciate also that it can be pop in, pop out, and that's okay as well. We really appreciate you spending some time with us. This is fantastic. And the next actually I've got the job to make sure that you're all safe, which is going to scare the heck out of you, isn't it really? But all you've got to do is follow these instructions. So in the case, I do have the instructions, by the way. So in the case of a fire, so if you hear the fire alarm sound, you have to evacuate the venue via the same route you entered, or via the nearest safe exit. So if in the event that something did happen, there would be parliamentary people here to help us as well. Anyway, follow the directions of the security staff, fire wardens, and the evacuation assembly point is at the rear of Parliament. So obviously where we came in was the front. So it's the opposite for that. Medical emergency, please refrain from calling 111 if something was to happen in the room today. Inform security staff, venue staff, and they will control it from there. Earthquake, drop cover in the hole until it stops. So we do have the tables out. Please keep away from windows and other obvious hazards in the venue. Remain inside the venue and wait instructions. So now visitor stickers, mindful that if you have got your stickers, we have got our name tags on, just obviously keep those on, please. Toilets, there's the grand toilets or the grand hall facility are located downstairs on the ground near the main entrance. Smoking and vaping is a no-no, apart from outside on Molesworth Street. Phones, please switch your phones off or put your phones to silent. If a phone does go off, this is not here, I'm going off trail here actually, but if your phone does go off, you will have to have a compulsory ice bucket challenge. So don't turn your phones off. I want to hear those phones ring. Photos are permitted in the space, that's all fine. In the space that's booked. So there's actually you'll see the media is out on what they call the checkerboard. They're waiting for the going through the house to the debating chamber. So clearly there's no photos taken outside of this environment here. Division bells every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, so obviously today, during the sitting weeks, the division bells will sound for members in the debating chamber at 1:53 and 6 p.m, and then later on in the evening as well. So the division bells may, on occasion, ring outside of these times due to voting in the debating chamber. So that's really just don't get a fright if you hear those bells. And that's it. That's health and safety. It's pretty important, of course. So my next pleasure and privilege is to introduce Lucy. But before I do that, we have got a fantastic board of trustees. They do it voluntarily and they're committed, and they do it because they really have a commitment to helping people with MND. We've got 4 here today, so I'm going to make you stand up. So we have Estelle Hartz. And beside I've got Alan Stanley. Obviously we've got Lucy, and I'm missing. Who am I missing? Mark, there we go. Very sorry, Mark. Mark's our newest member on the board of trustees. So please give him a big clap for the work. And it's not only because they're my bosses that I say all that. They do really work hard. So thank you. And I'd like to hand over to Lucy.
My name is Lucy Kipperfield and I'm the chair of the Neurone Disease Association, and it's my job to welcome you all, our supporters, here today. The story that Tamati just told about his auntie resonates completely with me. My father died of motor neurone disease about over 20 years ago, and if he had a tablet where he could write swear words on, he would have been writing on it. At MND, we do all we can to make sure people living with motor neurone disease receive the best possible support and care available. We help people with MND access the right health services at the right time, provide up-to-date information and offer support. We fund research in a way that we think is meaningful in a New Zealand context. Today is a very special day as we launch our best practice recommendations. This has been a culmination of significant time and effort contributed by the Motor Neurone Disease Clinical Working Group. Group includes 18 members from different health sectors around Aotearoa New Zealand who have an interest in improving care for people with MND and their whānau. The working group was co-chaired by Claire Riley, Chris Drennan and Alan Stanley. It's a thing we care deeply for as we seek to improve the lives of the people living with MND and their families. To give you a sense of the impact of this disease, I'd like to read you a message from Dr. Natalie Gold. In March 2022, I was diagnosed with ALS, the most common variant of motor neurone disease. This condition will progressively take away my ability to drive, walk, speak, turn over in bed, scratch my head, feed and wash myself, sit up, swallow and breathe. I will become completely dependent on others. As a 56-year-old who enjoyed activities like running, cycling, skiing, walking the dog and working innovatively both in New Zealand and internationally, the prospect of being reduced to a high level of dependency is extremely upsetting. However, my intellect will remain unaffected. Despite leading a health-conscious lifestyle with minimal drinking, regular exercise, good sleep and a healthy diet, my life expectancy is estimated to be 20 to 25 years less than average. This will have a significant impact on my contribution to society as a taxpayer and in my health work. It will be tough for everyone around me. The financial burden will increase due to the costs of MND forcing me to stop working earlier than planned and potentially requiring other family members to reduce their working hours. We are already paying for house modifications, equipment and care that is not covered by funding, adding to the financial strain. Alongside the physical challenges, there is also a mental burden caused by the progressive loss of function, terminal prognosis and the current lack of a cure. MND New Zealand plays a vital role in this disease by speaking up for us all living with MND, educating and supporting us and our whānau, contributing to research efforts and helping us to make time count while we can. Thank you, all of you, for your attendance and support of us. Thank you, Tamati, for your sponsorship of our event in the Grand Hall and your ongoing support of our cause. Thanks, Scott and the team at ND New Zealand for making this event happen. And thanks to Claire and Alan and all those involved in the development of this important piece of work.
Thank you, Lucy. And remiss of me, I needed to give some apology to people who have tendered their apologies. So from our board, there's Caron Palmer, who's our deputy chair, and Tricia Sloan and Melanie Glenn, so they can attend today. Also, an apology from Paula Tesareo, who is the CEO of Whaikaha, Ministry of Disabled People, but I want to thank Lauren, who's attending on her behalf today. So that's very good. Paula's been at the United Nations, just got back yesterday, so she's representing Kiwis with disabilities at the United Nations, doing a fantastic job. And want to welcome the rest of, we've got some, I feel, I don't know, privileged, a little bit of was going to say touched, but some people say I always am. But we've got some of the world-leading researchers in the room. We've got clinicians who have dedicated their lives, frankly, to MND, and most importantly, we've got people with MND with us today, and their family, their whānau, their carers, and that's why we're all here. So thank you all for coming. I really appreciate that. And on that note, I want to introduce Craig Walker, who has MND, and he's prepared to step up today and speak on behalf of people with MND. So thank you, Craig.
Great to see everybody here. I'm going to set a timer because I could be up here for a long time. I've got 5 minutes. It's going to be tough. Look, I am Craig Wilkins, and I was diagnosed with MND. The last time I got to speak in Parliament, I was 17 years old. I ran with a group of fellow students from Parliamentary Hui High School in a rotating relay, over quite a few days, and we arrived at Parliament to raise money for a new gymnasium. And I was head boy, and I had to deliver my message to Rob Muldoon and ask him for money. So, look, I see this journey that I've done as having a little bit of a parallel. It's an important thing for us all to be here today. It sure is a privilege that I'm here and I'm standing, because by rights I shouldn't be. I don't know what's happening, but for a lot of people, they lose that simple thing early on, but I'm here. Motor neurone disease is nothing I'd ever want on anybody. And to see and hear the stories of people who are not here today, it's crazy. An innocent visit to my doctor, I noticed a bit of a wasting of a muscle in my left hand, and I'd actually hit my knuckle with a mini sledgehammer working in a Waratah standard, and he said, oh look, I'll send you to a specialist, and which he did, and the specialist saw me, and I explained what I'd done, and he said, yeah, I know what it is. He did all his ding-dong tests on my limbs, and he said, it's your ulnar nerve. Goes down from your neck, down your shoulder to your arm, and hey, there's a good chance we can operate and get you moving again, but hey, I need to get an EMG done and find out. That's where the truth came out. So something that seemed like a fix became a reality. When I got that diagnosis, straight away you go, well shit, this is not what I'm wanting to be hearing after thinking there's a solution. But hey, for me, it quickly flipped. Wow. What do I have to do to combat what I've got and to maximise my time? So it was from shock to, this is a challenge, how am I going to, deal with it? So I focused on learning as much as I could about MND, understanding what it's about. I've got a wonderful specialist, Alison Charleston, and had some wonderful early on discussions and knowledge gained from that. I received great medical support from a couple of providers, being Rope Neuro and also Handworks. I'm wearing one of their little braces to help me. It it's been fantastic actually working with those organisations and providing the support. But it's absolutely superb, the support I've got, especially from my wife and children, and then also the friends and my business colleagues. I've always been a practical guy. I've been heavily involved in sports and activities. So one thing I've learned is, okay, I can't do some things. I've always loved water skiing, as an example, surfboard skiing. I can't do it, but I can still get out there on a boat. If I can't do things, what can I do? So it's really important that I can be mentally engaged with the activities. With the concepts and ideas, I managed to, what I soon lost is my ability to swim. So I came up with the concept. I'm an engineer by trade, a hand sport. I was swimming in a curve, so I worked out the concept idea, and with the help of handworks, I made a cup hand, and I could swim in a straight line. Using a power strap to hold my power tools with my wife had signed Velcro on. So it's the positivity of how you can do some of these things. So hey, look, my time's up. There's a lot more I could say. It's about attitude. Wonderful people in this room, and where we can all get to together. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm Craig had the privilege to launch the MND Action Month a couple of weeks ago by I think it was 2 buckets of ice over the top of me. So I think I gave him an ice. He got a bucket back. So fantastic. Thank you, Craig, and Tom, and for his son coming along as well. So I got that right. Yeah. So I want, before I start, and we'll keep moving on. I want to thank some fantastic people who have actually also made this happen. Couldn't actually happen without them, and that's the team. So I want them to stand up. Moira, Laura, Joe at the back, and Rob, and all of the rest of the team who couldn't be here today. They've worked hard so that we could have today. So please okay, so my role is to talk about the state of MND in New Zealand today. Why are we here? We've been around nearly 30 years. We know that we've been around for 30 years, and people that we've provided support to over that time, many who are no longer with us, they know as well. This is the time when we are stepping up and stepping out. We want more people to know, because actually as an organisation and as people, whether you have MND, whether you're working with people with MND, clinician, researcher, frankly, in a little country like New Zealand, we're punching above our weight, and we want to start talking about that. And that's why we're here today, because we also want politicians to know, we want government agencies to know, because we are who we are, and we're doing great work. We're a for-purpose organisation. Okay. Some facts about MND. I'm not going to read each of those. Many of you already know those. There's approximately 400 people with the disease in New Zealand. I want to jump right to the bottom. And the other thing that we're announcing today for MND Action Month is we see our role as being here to make time count. We want people to be able to make time count while they have the disease. And then their families after, during and after. That's important. And as I said, there's over 400 people with the disease, approximately 3 in 100,000. We do have a slight advantage over other parts of the world. Not an advantage we actually want to have, but we're not quite sure why we have it. Approximately just over 100 people will pass away, sadly. in each year, and approximately just under 3 people per week will be diagnosed with it. So you know, it's not contagious. We all know that, and it's also part of why we're here today. Say, we shouldn't be embarrassed. We shouldn't be ashamed about MND. This is a disease. It's not because someone's done something wrong. And we're all here to help people with MND. The key point at the bottom: the majority of people with MND are living and being cared for in their home of choice, and that home of choice is predominantly in the community. There are not many people with MND in a facility, which makes the work that we do very important because we provide community-based support services. How do we help make time count? We've distilled it down to 4 things: support, educate, advocate, and connect. So we walk alongside. We're a shoulder to lean on, to cry on at times. Educate, we create and provide educational materials, and our goal is to make those available when people need them. The MND journey, sort of starts at a certain point, and it's always different for each person. And people need to know, what am I dealing with now? What am I going to deal with in the immediate future? And then so it's up to us to try and have that ready and available at the time it's needed. We have facilitated and funded the development of the best practice recommendations, which Dr. Stanley is going to talk about. And this is significant. Not only because we're speaking Australians, they don't have these. They've got a copy of ours now, and they're working on developing theirs. Advocate, raising awareness and advocating, and connecting. Pretty much we're the guiding light at times. We know how complex the health and disability and social systems are. We do provide a guiding light. Then research. So I said earlier, we've got world-leading researchers in New Zealand working on this disease and trying to find a cause and therefore a cure. We had funded to get the MND registry up and running. It's a fantastic asset for the country, and we continue to fund it to keep it going and work with the people who are keeping it going. And we're committed to the current research for Lighthouse 2, which again Alan's going to talk about. We want a cure to be found, of course, because, well, in one regard, it means we haven't got any jobs. We want 2 things. We want to make time count, and we don't want to have a job. Right? Because if we don't have a job, then our work is done. So that's a goal that we do have. Collaboration. We'll collaborate with anybody who shares our passion to make time count. So, and because we can't do it ourselves, we've got to work with people in the room, people who are not in the room. We're members of various organisations and many more, by the way. I've just listed some of them. We do work with the International Alliance. All around the globe, there are organisations like ours. Bigger, smaller, and about the same size. We get information from Turkey, we get information from Holland, and we feed information back to them as well. And our people, Moira, for example, will be involved in local multidisciplinary teams and working with them as part of that team. And another reason, as I said, for us having this today, we want to make it known that we want to work, with the government agencies. We want to work with MPs because it's just so important to us. And we're involved with, so the environment that we're in is changing. And we all do that for various reasons. We are going through an evolutionary process. We want to continue the in-home visits that are important. We want to actually provide more, but some of that more will be done in a different way. So we're working on that now. We're establishing 5 advisory groups, and you'll see at the bottom bullet point: lived experience, equity, clinical, research, and fun. I want to hear from anybody who wants to be involved in any one of those. So talk to me later or get in touch later. We're launching a report in July, which is called The State of MND in Aotearoa. I was hoping to have it all done and dusted and ready today, but there's another study going on, which is the National Cost of MND study, which is going to aggregate some very important data, and it's too important not to have it included in our report. So it will be distributed in the media and so on when that happens. And we expect government and other agencies to work with us to address some of the issues that's going to highlight. Some of those issues, and here are 5 of them. The best practice recommendations. So you've got a book in front of you, please take it away. If you want some spares, there could be some available for you. We want those adopted nationally, and we want the level of care for people with MND to become high and to become consistent. There should be, and to quote a few politicians and ministers, there should be no postcode lottery when it comes to MND, but there is. We want that to change. Research, we need more support and more funding. Okay. We've got world-leading researchers. Why aren't we giving them enough to get on with it? We've got to find that cure. Equipment, damn hard. All right? That's got to change. Someone who has a life expectancy of 2 years shouldn't have to wait a year to even just get a referral through the system, let alone wait then for the bit of equipment they need. If you can't cough, you can't clear your throat, why shouldn't you have a cough assistance machine straight away? It just shouldn't happen. Okay? Carers needs, carers in the room today, and people who have been carers. In general, we're not caring for our carers in New Zealand in a general term. The Infometrics report that's come out recently says that, and that's got to change as well. We care about our carers, and we want that to be we want things better for them. Funding. Yeah, and that goes without saying. And we'll make a compelling case, I'm sure. What next? Get on board to help us to make time count. That's what we're here for. Help us to help those who are looking for a cure. Just help us. Okay? Thank you in advance for your help. Okay? Thank you. Now, I mentioned world-leading researchers are my privilege and pleasure to introduce Dr. Emma Scott, who is one of those. Thank you.
Not trusted. I think I've got 20 minutes, so just bear with me. So it's my great pleasure to be here today to give you some highlights around the genetics and biology of motor neuron disease. And I'm going to talk about the Motor Neuron Disease Research Hub, which is, which comprises the activities of our lab, and then kind of some spokes that we interact with and other agencies that help us to do the work that we do. So I'm at the University of Auckland, right up at Aotearoa, at the Centre for Brain Research, and some of my students and staff are there, so any questions, pick on them. So before I talk about our work specifically, I want to give you a bit of a picture about the motor neuron disease research infrastructure in New Zealand. This is probably something that's not very visible. We'd like to actually make it more clear what the building blocks are for MND research in New Zealand, because I think this is where funding can really make a huge difference to a lot of different research studies. So the things that we have in place already that are the foundations of research are the human brain and human biobanks. These are based at the University of Auckland, and they accept brain tissue from people with various diseases, but including people who have died from motor neuron disease. And they bank brain and spinal cord tissue for us to study. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in my talk. We also have Sir Richard Ball here, who's also the medical patron of Neurone Disease NZ, and he established the brain bank in 1993, I think, wasn't it? To collect brain tissue from people with Huntington's disease, and it's since expanded and is now our source for interaction and understanding of brain tissue from people with motor neuron disease as well. Around 2017, I established the Motor Neuron Disease Research Network, so that's the next building block you can see there. And that's really a researcher-facing network. It's for researchers in New Zealand to collaborate with one another so we can share resources, share understanding, and also to increase our visibility across the board. My lab is the only one that works specifically on motor neuron disease research, but there's other groups around the country who do other kinds of work, and then they also work with MND cohorts. So it's been wonderful to work with those groups, including in allied health and technology and other fields. The next building block you can see there is going to be the main kind of topic of my study, the national MND, the main topic of my talk today. That's the National MND Genetics Study. So you can see there's me there and Dr. Richard Roxburgh, who is a clinician in Auckland. You'll see his name again because next to the study we've got the Motor Neuron Disease Patient Registry, and probably a lot of you have heard about the registry. The idea is to collect information invited to research studies, and that includes clinical trials. And of course, I consider the MND clinicians to be one of the building blocks of MND research infrastructure. You can see them at the end there. And the clinicians, the patient registry, and our genetics study all kind of contribute into running clinical trials, particularly for us, from our perspective, to get people with specific genes into trials for specific genetic therapies. And you can see at the bottom there, there's MND NZ. They are funding 3, if not more, of these building blocks, and I think they're really putting their money into these very strategic areas that are supporting a lot of research in New Zealand. Just before I move on, my slide looks a bit funny there. Just before I move on, I want to talk about an initiative I'm involved in as part of kind of the Australian push towards MND cure and support. It's called the Australian MND Collective. So this collective was put together by 60 experts from lived experience, medicine, research, and the idea, they've got these kind of 3 arms of the collective. The first arm aims to accelerate discovery of treatments and research, aiming towards a cure for MND and to getting those to people quickly. So that's the arm of the collective that I'm involved in. I'm on the driving team, and I've just put down a few of the things that we're working towards in that driving team. And it's targeted really at Australian MND, but for us there are benefits in understanding their pipeline and being privy to applying to their funding pots and also to collaborate. So a little bit strategic there. We're considered a state node, so as much as New Zealanders never want to be considered part of Australia here, I think it benefits us. So 3 of the things that we're doing as part of this collective is we're mapping the resources that are available across Australasia to do motor neuron disease research. And that includes people with different expertise, samples and equipment. And actually the resource map is in its draft form. We're going to be able to distribute that within the next week or so for people in the room, people across New Zealand to also contribute to and update what our resources are. That will be a living document accessible to researchers. We're also going to start setting up knowledge exchanges, getting people with different expertise moving between different labs. And the overall idea is that we collaborate across Australasia to get drugs quickly through a pipeline from preclinical to clinical into people. And the other 2 arms of this collective are to improve the standard of care and the lived experience of people with MND, and the third arm is to kind of produce the infrastructure and do the collaboration that's required to have those first 2 goals achieved. This is their strategy map, which I won't go through, but just to say they're quite organised. And the red bit is where we're working on the accelerating discoveries kind of side of things. But they've really thought about, who's involved, how do we get people with lived experience driving and letting us know what the priorities are, how do we bring equity into the system, and how does it happen quickly and for low cost. It's always a challenge. So this is the kind of context that we're working in. It's the New Zealand motor neuron disease research context, and a little bit about our work with Australia. We also collaborate internationally, which I'll talk about a little bit. But to focus more on that kind of hub that I talked about, we take I say here a proteins to people approach, but actually we're going to see that it's a people to proteins approach. So I guess proteins to people is, if you look at the left side of the screen, we start really looking at things on a tiny little basis, the really small scale things that might be involved in motor neuron disease. The RNA, which is a molecule in cells, and the proteins, what's going on there. Then we look at living cells in a dish. Then we move on to patient brain tissues. We're kind of moving up the scale, the size scale. Then we might move into thinking about what genetics underpin people's disease, working with people with disease, looking at symptoms, and then we're engaging with people. So I guess that's a size scale, but it's not really how we do our work, because it's actually people that drive the research. So we start at the other end. There's me with my hair is a bit grey. We engage and we meet people with disease, and we learn from them and their stories what we should be doing. We can't do what we're doing without knowing what the priorities are and working with families who have specific challenges for which research can answer questions. So we go backwards from working with people, engaging, then we might go back and tell people what we found in terms of their genetics. And that might enable us to also find new genes that cause the disease. We might then have a chance to work with family members who have died and look at their brain pathology. And we might go back and think, oh, we're not really sure what went on in that brain. Let's kind of model that in a dish. Let's have some cells and we'll tinker around with those cells to make them behave as if they were from a person with motor neuron disease, and we'll see what's going wrong. And then we might go back even to that, that tiniest size scale and identify some new drugs. But really it starts from people and it goes backwards. And some of those lovely faces you'll see in the audience here. So I said that the major thing I'll be talking about in terms of that work we do is our motor neuron disease genetics study. So I want to give you a bit of background about what we know about genetics from international studies. So I think Scott brought this up on his slide. Our general understanding is that there's about 5 to 10% of cases of motor neuron disease which we would say are strongly familial. There might be a person with motor neuron disease who had a parent with motor neuron disease, a grandparent with motor neuron disease, a really strong pattern of the disease being inherited and appears in multiple family members. We know that there are about 35 genes that cause the disease, but actually it's a lot more complex than that. So I'm going to take you over to these graphs, and I promise there's probably no more graphs. So I'll take you through these ones slowly. So if you look at that top circle, that shows you the cohort or the group of people with familial motor neuron disease. They've got that really strong family history. And they make up about 5 or 10% of all people with the disease. But you can see the number 68% in the middle there. That means if we did genetic testing of that group, we could find the gene that caused their disease in about 68% of them. And some of the genes are listed there. Some of you might be familiar with the names. C9 or 72, that's the most common genetic cause of motor neuron disease. There are some other ones in there. And actually only about a third of cases of people who have a very strong family history, only about a third of those people we wouldn't find a gene if we looked across all the genes that we know cause the disease. And I think probably we'll chip away at those, and eventually we would be able to identify the gene in everyone who had a family history. So what about the vast majority of people who don't have a family history? That's the next circle down. So just recall that is about 90 to 95% of people. And the number in the middle there is 11%. So if we tested those people for all the known genes, we'd only find 11% of them have a gene change that we know caused their disease. So what does that mean? It means that A, there's a lot of blur and overlap between familial and sporadic disease. We can't say don't test people with sporadic disease for genetic causes. They've got genes sometimes, we can find the gene that caused their disease, and it means that the rest of their family is probably at some genetic risk. It also means there's probably something else going on, because, for my maths, 89% of people, we did find a genetic cause. Is it that there are environmental causes that also contribute to disease risk? And we think that's true. And there's another thing that's also important, is that the gene changes that are in that bottom group are sometimes slightly different from the gene changes in the top group, and it might be that they don't necessarily ensure that the person would develop motor neuron disease. So it's a little bit trickier in that group. But the take-home message is that sporadic MND is a term that it's kind of misused. It's falling out of favour because there's this really this dynamic kind of overlap between the two groups. We see the same kind of genes in both groups, the same kind of clinical presentation, even the same brain changes. So it's an unofficial distinction. And we can't be deciding who gets genetic testing through the public service on the basis of whether a proper family history was collected. And I think that's another thing to remember, is that, we think if you've got a strong family history of MND, if grandparent, parent and child, have this pattern of MND. But what's often missed is if the presentation is not MND. So some of these genes cause people to have something called frontotemporal dementia. It's a cognitive and personality changing disorder, which looks very different from MND. And it's sometimes not recognised that a person with MND who has a parent with this specific kind of dementia, that could be related by the same gene. That's really important. So we've got to really be careful about thinking people with sporadic MND don't need genetic testing. We really do need to research study should not be testing people with MND and giving them back their results because there's no public service to do so. But that is what's happening right now. So, having said that, what are we doing? So this is what our study looks like, and it's a really complicated study because we do have to go back to people with a validated diagnostic result that they can action. Basically, their neurologist can tell them what to do about this genetic result. Their family can make decisions based on this result. So we started in Auckland, and you can see there's a little kind of iPhone there. Our wonderful genetic counsellors, which Miriam is here in the audience, will make a telephone call to people who have expressed interest in the study, and they'll invite them to consent to be involved in the study. And if they are happy with that, everything gets signed off, and we invite them to go to their local pathology lab. So just your lab plus or your path lab or whatever your local one is, anywhere in the country, any city, wherever there's a path lab to collect blood, people can go and do that. Then the blood is sent through the special courier system down to Canterbury Health Laboratories in Christchurch. They extract the DNA. And they do the first test for us, which is that most common gene, C9orf72. So probably around a month after a person donates blood to our study, if they had a C9orf72 gene change, we would know it and we'd be able to get back to them and tell them that. We then send DNA, first of all, across to the left, we send DNA to the University of Queensland. They do some testing for us of the most common 5 genes. Then they send data down to Macquarie University. I'll explain why they do that soon. And then we start sending samples all over the place, depending on the family history and other indicators that whether we found a gene or not already at that point. So we've really got this very bespoke service, sending DNA to all kinds of different places, depending on the person and depending on what we've found. And this is something that's well beyond the resourcing of the clinical service, but it really shouldn't have to be this complicated. We're doing this because we're working on the smell of an oily rag. It's really funded mostly through philanthropy, so there'll be much more rapid ways to do this if we weren't so limited by funding. Okay, so what have we found? So far we have tested samples from 180 people, and we've given them back results. If they have disease, we can return the result to them. So we tested for the top 5 most common genes and around another 50 different gene changes. And those 180 people that we've tested so far, they comprise a few controls. We don't really need controls for this particular study, but we have some for specific reasons. And we have 121 people who have no family history of disease. 29 people are unaffected family members, meaning they have someone in the family, at least one person in the family with MND that is familial. So they're in an MND family, but they themselves don't have MND. Then we've got 13 people who have familial MND, and something that we've started doing recently that's been really transformational, it's not done in many other studies, and certainly there's not the resource to do it through the public system, is if the family comes to us and they say, oh look, I don't have MND, but my mum had MND and my granddad had MND, they've passed on, but I really want to give you my DNA to help. What can you learn from my DNA? Well, if that person doesn't have MND, we cannot be sure that they have the family gene. So we just tested them and we don't find anything. Does it mean they don't have the family gene, or we're looking in the wrong place, we're looking at the wrong genes? So what we need to do for those people is find someone in the family who is living with MND or who has died from MND, and we can test their genes. So often there's no one living in the family that has MND, everyone's died. So we can then go and, with the family's consent, we can actually seek DNA from those people who have already died from the disease. And that way we can, people, even after their death, can help solve their family's genetic mystery. So that's been really rewarding for us. We've solved at least one family doing that, and there's another one that we're very close on. So we only report results back to people who have the disease, but we've actually worked with 46 MND families. About half of them have that C9orf72 gene, and there's about 8 families who we don't know the gene for yet. I'm going to go a little bit quicker because I only got 2 minutes. We've got a new study to go back and work with those families a bit more closely. What did we find? There were 20 people with that C9orf72 gene, about 11% of everyone. But the really important thing is that 4 of those people had no family history. We wouldn't have expected necessarily to find a gene, but that's 3% of people have no family history of disease, we could find the gene. Same with the SOD1 gene. 2 of the people that we found to have the SOD1 gene have turned up with the study with no family history. And that's especially important because there is an FDA-approved drug for that SOD1 gene. So we really need to be testing everyone with MND, regardless of family history. We found some other genetic signals that we're not sure of the importance of, and I'll talk about those in the next. I've only got a few more slides, but I'll talk about those soon. What we're really pleased about is that we've been able to, on the basis of these genetic results, been able to get people into clinical trials. They can be, based on their genetic result, they can be referred to gene therapy trials that might help them. And something that really brought tears to my eyes, the Genetic Health Service recently told me that on the basis of our genetic results, a family has been able to have pre-implantation testing to have a baby that will eventually be born free of an MND gene. So when I said, what's the difference between sporadic and familial MND, this one's a bit complex, but something we do that's well beyond the bounds of what could be done clinically and what we should really be able to focus on, because we're not doing all the stuff that should be done clinically, is looking at understanding why people with sporadic MND seem to turn up out of the blue. Because actually, what we find is they don't have gene changes. They're not the first person in the family to have the gene change. It's that we haven't looked hard enough for related people that have the same gene change. So this work done by Neurone and the audience and our collaborators at Macquarie, we've got a person up. How do we get a pointer? We've got a person. Oh gosh, no. But a person up in the top left who has NZ SOD1 written and red beside them. They turned up to our study with no family history. But when we looked at the shared chunks of DNA between them and another 4,000 people with MND, we found they were actually related to a whole lot of people with MND distantly. And all those other people that they were related to with MND had the same gene change. They're actually distant family members. They're spread across the UK, Australia, and then we've got our one person from New Zealand. So it's this kind of mega family of distantly related people that tell us that this person didn't have sporadic MND at all. They had familial MND that was not recognised. So we're really proud of this kind of work. And then the final thing I'll talk about in the -2 minutes that I have is the times when we find gene changes and we don't really know what they mean. Do they cause MND or not? So what we're looking for is, can we get a biological readout of what that gene change does? What happens if we look in the cells or tissues from people with that gene change? Does it look like it caused motor neuron disease? And what happens if we build a model in a dish of cells and we introduce that gene change? What does your cells actually do? And also we would have confidence that a gene change causes motor neuron disease if we saw that gene change in all the family members that also had MND. So this is my last slide, and I've just got Neurone and Kyra on here. So Neurone's on the left. What he does is he takes these gene changes that we don't really know the significance of, and he puts them into cells. And he looks to see, have the cells actually change the way the gene is read. Instead of the gene being like a book, where every third or fourth page needs to get ripped out before the final copy can tell you how to build a protein, some of those pages get left in by accident. So Neurone has had a look and he's seen that graph there. Actually, if you have a mutation in the ATP13A2 gene, it's about 35 times more likely that you'll accidentally leave in a page of the book that you should have ripped out. And we're looking at what the implications are for them building a protein out of that booklet. Then we've got Kyra on the right there, and she looks in human brain tissue. She's trying to understand whether gene changes look the same, you get the same kind of brain patterns in a person with a specific gene change, if you then compare it to a person with a related gene change that we know definitely causes MND. So it's basically pattern recognition. Do we see changes in genes, changes in cells that would indicate to us that a gene change is damaging? And then once we know that, we can go back to people and help them make family decisions. So this is my second to last slide. Sorry, I've gone a bit over. I just want to say that there are some things we're really proud of, and some things that we shouldn't really be doing, that we should be able to leave off. Much like Scott said, it'd be great to know that we've done our job and we can hand these things over. So we've been enabling access to genetic testing for people with sporadic MND. It's really hard for them to get free and well-supported genetic testing through the public service. And same for people at risk of familial MND, there are long wait times for people. We're really proud of identifying people who are at risk of inheriting an MND gene when their relative turned up to our study or is having MND and there's no family history. They wouldn't have known, so we've helped to make some family planning decisions on the basis of that. And in the last few slides I talked about really understanding these other gene changes that we're not sure about. That's something that's really our specialist expertise. And finally, building the infrastructure to keep doing this kind of research and to feed into other people's studies. We really love sharing this information so that other people can do research studies that include genetic data. So we have lots of people that are involved in this work and lots of supporters, but I think the important thing is that so much of this is philanthropy and it really shouldn't be. This should be something that a lot of it's taken over by the public service and government funding has increased for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. That's fantastic. And thank you, Sir Richard, for coming today. I really appreciate that and the work that you've done over many years to get us to this point as well. If I didn't already say it earlier on, funding for research, that's a given. We've got to philanthropy plays a part. It shouldn't be playing the only part. To do what we do, is provide the services that we do and to invest in research, invest in these world-class people. 97% of our income comes from the generosity of our fellow Kiwis. Donations, fundraising, bequests and grants. We've got MND Action Month going on right now, and that feeds into, it's a major source of keeping us going for the rest of the year. And Walk to the Feet, that's going to be back, baby. So look for November this year. So it'll be walks in the parks, fundraise, raise awareness. 97% of what we do comes from the generosity of the Kiwis. The other 3% comes from, and we're very grateful for that, from Paikaha. So thank you, Lauren. And the Ministry of Disabled People. So we're not totally neglected. And we do appreciate that. So my privilege to have gotten to know Alan as a trustee on our board, but also as someone who's absolutely committed to what we're doing. And I want to ask over to Alan to talk about the best practice recommendations and the Lighthouse Trial.
Thanks very much. So I'm privileged to be able to talk on behalf of the Clinical Working Group, just to present the work we did drafting the guidelines, which are on the table in front of you. It's the first time I've seen it printed out. I've only seen it as a PDF, so it's much thicker than I thought it would be. So I'll try and summarise it briefly. So I guess the first point is why a best practice document. Obviously MND is a complex condition, and the difficulty in managing it is that it's a rapidly changing condition across multiple clinical domains. And so the multidisciplinary care and coordination of that care is the crux of treatment. And because New Zealand has so many remote areas, there are lots of people in those small areas who have difficulty accessing care. And so we felt that improved coordination and planning was really the key, and having some sort of reference document for that is an important foundation. But it wasn't only us who felt that. This process started off with a survey of the community in 2018, which was well before my involvement, with a follow-up survey to clinicians, and then the first Hui, which happened here, so it's nice to be back, which informed the Association's Improving Care, Improving Lives initiative, of which the practice recommendations are just a part. I apologise for the sloppy statistics. I tried to change them just before this, but I got the numbers wrong on a previous slide. But essentially that survey found that 60% of people with MND and their family had information needs and 40% had unmet practical needs. There was a large response rate that should be 70% of people with MND and their carers and 30% of health professionals. But overwhelmingly, respondents felt that clinical pathways to help improve structured care would be the most important. The survey that followed up was quite brief, but just got clinicians to highlight what they thought were the most important topics, and that informed the Hui and the topics that were discussed there, where we sort of outlined the broad framework of what we thought care should look like, which was a fantastically busy day, but very productive. And so that, out of the Hui really came the idea that across the country we felt that there was a lack of standardised national care pathways, there were disparities in how care was provided, there was limited knowledge outside of specialist areas, and a lack of coordination between all the different cogs, and also a lack of translation of international research into everyday practice in all our different centres. And so, again, we felt that trying to bring all of that together into a guideline would be the most helpful. So the clinical working group kicked off just as COVID kicked off, and so like many of you, we worked online, but we met monthly, and the co-chairs I took over halfway through. And Chris really kept everyone on track, and we managed to get through the bulk of the work in about 13 or 14 months, which I think is pretty good going for drafting a guideline. The final draft was endorsed by several important organisations who have relevance to MND care, giving us some academic credibility and weight of those clinical associations. And ultimately this led to the document in front of you, which covers a number of all the key areas, and I'm not going to talk through all of these, but just to give you a sort of contents page of what's in store when you dip into the document. I think the main thing we're trying to focus on improving the speed of diagnosis and then the coordination of care. And so the main aim in the sort of assessment is trying to highlight the diagnosis to GPs and general practitioners and allied health staff who aren't necessarily familiar with the condition, to try and get them to refer promptly, and that we say the condition suspected on the referral. People are still reticent to say this could be MND. And that, unfortunately, then knocks onto, if you're speaking in a slightly veiled way, it knocks onto delays in the appropriate triage and the patient being seen, because with the volumes of people seen in our health service, you have to have a way of triaging and separating out who really needs to be seen initially. Multidisciplinary key is just the main focus, and it has to be the coordination of care that is at the forefront of our thoughts about MND care. One of the main points that I want to draw from here is that we think that every health region should have an MND MDT, where patients are discussed and communicated, and that each health area has a dedicated FTE for an MND coordinator. There are 10 plus people involved in the care of every person with MND. And for that person to try and approach those people individually is unwieldy. You need one person that can be a point of contact and can help link all the different spokes together. And the next point is Scott mentioned this briefly earlier, is that access to equipment and adaptations is the next thing. So now we need to recognise those people, we need to bring them into coordinated care. Now we need to give them the things that help them to maintain their function and engagement. And so we need to be able to anticipate that in advance. And one of the current frustrations is trying to apply the things ahead of time, which in the current models of how those processes are set up is very frustrating and often not possible. We can anticipate the needs, and so we need to be responsive. We need to try and ensure that the healthcare service is adaptive and can plan ahead. You shouldn't have to have the disability so that you can then get on a 3-month waiting list for a piece of equipment. You should be able to order that 3 or 4 months ahead of time, because you know that's the trajectory that you're heading on. And so that's at the forefront of our advocacy with government. So our hope for the future is that we want every person with MND to have the best care. I'm sure that's shared by everyone in the room. This involves equipment access and prioritisation, the appointment of care coordinators in each region so that we can try and ensure that complex network of care is brought together well. And the key point is accessing respiratory support and devices. And then we need to keep coming back. This has to be an iterative process. We have to get feedback from the community. How is this working? What are people's experiences? and we have to engage in regular clinical audit. And I was thrilled to hear that the team from the Hut has already used the best practice recommendations to do an audit of their service to help try and advocate for more equipment and services in their area. And I think that's above what I could have thought that that's already happened. This is everyone involved, and I, as I said, took over as co-chair quite late in the piece, and a lot of this work and foundations of this work were laid by all of these people. I'm just the one who gets to stand in here and tell you about it. And so we're very pleased to have the document in front of you as a working document, and we look forward to contribution to an international trial. But it's quite a pivotal moment for New Zealand, I think, because it's a general trial, not a genetic focus trial. And so I think that access to clinical trials is actually quite an important topic when you're dealing with a terminal illness with no effective cure. And most people living with MND want access to clinical trials. They want to be able to try experimental therapies and have access. And clinical research, as you've heard from Emma, nationally and internationally, is vibrant and thriving. And a lot of that basic science work is gathering momentum and being translated into clinical practice. But we are a little bit on the fringes of that because of our small population, relatively few neurologists, and that actually is one of the stumbling blocks, is that you need people to help run these trials at a local level. And so really to attract more trials, we need to develop and improve our capacity. And so I think that the opportunity of the Lighthouse trial is partly to build those clinical networks and try and get people engaged in this kind of research on a day-to-day basis. So the Lighthouse 2 trial is an Australian-led collaboration with the UK at King's College and Europe. It's an academic-initiated trial, so there's no pharmaceutical industry funding, which is a blessing and a curse, because money helps to grease the wheels of these things, but it also means there's no pharmaceutical interference. And it's also using a repurposed medication that's already available for Triamec, so if it works, it'll be rapidly translatable into clinical practice. So those are the reasons why we thought that it would be a good trial to be involved in. So just to go back a little bit to science, so it's looking at something called human endogenous retroviruses, or HERVs, which are an odd concept, but basically large chunks of our DNA are borrowed from ancient viruses that are floating around and have transcribed themselves into our genome. We think, or thought, that most of that was junk DNA, but there is some evidence that these can get reactivated and lead to changes in the cell. Now what's interesting is that retroviruses are quite topical over the last 30 years or so, because HIV is a retrovirus. And so some of the medications that are used for HIV potentially can impact on those retroviruses that are built into our genome. And there's some evidence with MND that those HERV-related proteins are active and increased and relevant to disease. And so the idea of this trial is to see whether the antiretroviral medication can knock down that viral transcription and influence clinical outcome. And there was some initial promising work that's now being followed up with this phase 3 trial. So the trial is co-funded, but MND New Zealand contributed a large amount of money to it. Unfortunately, we can only have 4 sites, partly for practical reasons and partly for funding reasons, and so we're looking to enroll 20 people in total. And we're using, as much as possible, the people who've approached the registry to express their interest in clinical trials to try and enroll them into the study. And I think that this really needs to be viewed in context of everything else that's going on. There are obviously some genetic trials, as Emma spoke about. The Way of Whānau offers one that's currently ongoing. We have a more general trial in Lighthouse. And what we need to show is that we can do these trials, that we have the infrastructure, enthusiasm, and the people so that we can attract further trials. Because also we have to show that to pharmaceutical industry that we can do this, that we have the people, the resources, so that we get more investments and the trials get offered to us. I think one of the things people misunderstand about clinical trials is that they can't always And a lot of that research is going to be offered first to large populations in America and Europe and Australia. So we have to show that we can punch above our weight in that way as well. And it's not just a question of us getting enough money, we also have to show our community. And I think lastly, in both of these projects, it just comes to me to say thanks to Claire Riley, who unfortunately couldn't be here today due to changes in her health. But Claire will, I'm sure, be familiar to many of you as a driving force behind a lot of the stuff that's gone on with M&D care and research and the association. Just a few of the things she's been involved in, she conceived and saw through the very first New Zealand-based Walk to Defeat event since 2014. She was involved in setting up the registry, the M&D Research Network. She helped to set up the clinical working group. She was instrumental in helping the association draft their research strategy and has been a link of people with lived experience into the association and their small management structure. For all of these things, she was awarded the Queen's Service Medal in 2017. And I think, when I was trying to think what I could say about Claire, I think that although these are just a few of the things she's done in virtually every aspect of M&D and the association you can think of, she's the quiet and gentle but very persistent driving force that's actually brought a lot of this together. And she's put a huge amount of effort in networking and bringing people together. And I think really her contribution is incalculable. But she's a wonderful person, and we valued her contribution. And I think I've barreled through all of that and got us through just on time. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. What we've got today is a snapshot of the work and the mahi that's going on in New Zealand and the relationships with offshore. That document, please take it away, obviously. We don't want any left behind today. We want these back with you, back home, back in your office, share it with your colleagues, whatever. This document is incredibly important. Make no mistake, this has got to become the practice across the country, and it's got to become consistently applied. So, let's do that. And someone who I do believe, actually, Dr. Claire Riley, harassed, harangued, and possibly yelled at her a few times, I don't know, is Tamati. So, Tamati's, again, thank you for the day, Tamati, and he's going to close off. You don't have to rush off. We will have, I better make sure, tea and coffee to go, before you go. And you'll be able to mix and mingle, and you can talk to the speakers today if you've got any questions or comments. So, thank you very much.
I know that she's ducked away, but I need to fix the wrong that I didn't acknowledge my colleague Jan Logie, Green Party MP, but also Simon O'Connor, who's a National Party MP that was here a little bit earlier as well. I need to just make that right. 101 in this space is acknowledge your colleagues, and I forgot to do that, so now that's been fixed. Thank you again, Scott, and thank you everybody. I heard the end of that final presentation. If our family had had this kind of information when Auntie Mari was first diagnosed, it would have been a lot easier for us to have to navigate instead. We had to traverse it ourselves and go with what smattering of information they had available at the time. So just the recommendations that have been put forward are crucial for enabling families to be able to cope. So I thank you for that. Can I just wrap up by saying that back in Aotearoa, where I come from, we also had another one of our stalwarts locally diagnosed with MND, and he made the very big and bold decision to choose the end-of-life option. It happened very quickly for him. He wasn't expecting it. He was one of my very good friends, and he went downhill very fast. And while he was of sound body and mind, he decided that that was the pathway that he wanted to choose. And we, as his friends and his network and his village all around him, we chose to make it as painless as possible and to go on that journey with him. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge Tony Gill, one of my very, very good friends who will be sorely missed back home in Aotearoa, but who we know is in a much better place now. Can I acknowledge the kōrero here today and wrap up with the closing karakia. The bells that you're hearing means that next door we're all about to kick off a question time. The circus is about to start. If you you walk out that door, which I implore you not to, the media are all out there with their cameras, hustling for questions and items on the news tonight. So I think we need a blessing to wrap us up before we go into that kind of environment. So kia inui tātou. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te ata whai o tō tātou arikia kreiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake ake, amen. Kia ora tātou.
So somebody assures me he hasn't got any particular questions to answer, so but I'm sure he'll contribute to the service. So thank you everybody. Don't take off. Feel free to stay and have a chat. If we're not allowed to go out that door, I'm not sure which way we go, but I would just say let's go out that door and have a chat to the media, right? So, okay, thank you very much for coming today, and mark in your calendar this week, the week of the 21st of June, which is International MND Day, and the week is International MND Week. Happens June is the month. So mark in your calendars, in 12 months' time we'll be back here. Okay. Thank you very much.